The heat in Redemption, Nevada, is a physical presence, a weight that settles in the lungs and presses the dust into every crease of clothing. It bakes the silence into the cracked earth of the town square, a silence broken only by the buzz of flies and the exasperated sighs of Sheriff Brody. He stands on the warped boards of his office porch, watching another of the town's good women march away from the jailhouse, her face a mask of indignation and failure. That makes 10. Or is it 20? He's lost count. The women of Redemption, armed with Bibles, plates of bland stew, and condescending pity, have all tried and failed to handle the man in the cage. He is a problem. A black man of formidable size, arrested 3 weeks ago after a brawl outside the saloon with Jeb Caldwell, the son of the most powerful rancher in the territory. Jeb had a broken nose. The black man, Silas, had only a split lip and the impossibly calm demeanor of a man watching a distant storm. He said nothing then and has said almost nothing since. He simply exists in his cell, a monument of silent defiance that the town cannot comprehend or break. They call him caged, but from the way he watches them, Brody sometimes feels they are the ones on display. Across the square, a figure detaches itself from the deep shadows of the general store's awning. She is tall, impossibly so for a woman, with the straight-backed posture of a pine tree that has refused to bend to the wind. Her name is Taza, and she is Apache. She comes down from the hills every few weeks to trade, a silent specter the townsfolk give a wide berth. They call her Giant, a word they use as both a descriptor and a curse. She moves with a quiet economy, her gaze missing nothing. Today, it rests on the sheriff, then on the jailhouse doors swinging softly in the hot breeze. She hears the muttered curses, sees the frustration. She sees the cage. And in the oppressive silence of that afternoon, a decision takes root in ground no one else knew was fertile. Before we ride deeper into this Western tale, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. And if you love a good old-fashioned story of the frontier, hit like and subscribe. The story of Silas's arrival was simple and ugly, a tale told 1,000 times across the West. He'd been passing through, a blacksmith by trade, looking for work. His skill was undeniable, but his skin color was a brand. Jeb Caldwell, drunk and emboldened by his father's name, had seen an easy target for his cruelty. He had not anticipated the man's strength, nor his refusal to be baited by insults. When Jeb threw the first punch, Silas had simply caught the fist, his grip like iron. Jeb's companions had descended, and the fight had been brutally one-sided until Silas, with 2 clean, powerful movements, had ended it. Sheriff Brody, arriving to the aftermath, had done the predictable thing. He'd arrested the black man. Jeb's father, Marcus Caldwell, ensured the charge was assault, with intent to do great harm. It was a lie, and the whole town knew it, but Caldwell's money was the foundation upon which redemption was built. So Silas sat. The cell was small, suffocating in the relentless heat. A narrow cot, a bucket. The bars were thick, rusted with the sweat of desperate men. But Silas treated it not as a prison, but as a hermitage. He rationed his water. He ate only what he had to of the thin gruel the deputy brought. He spent hours in perfect stillness, his eyes focused on the sliver of sky visible through the high, barred window. The silence was his armor, his forge, his only weapon. He had learned long ago that to speak to men who saw him as less than human was to validate their perception. To rage was to become the beast they imagined. So he offered them nothing. He became a void, and into that void, the good people of Redemption poured their fear, their prejudice, and their frustration. They sent women, thinking a softer touch might succeed where threats had failed. First came the pastor's wife, with a Bible and a lecture on penitence. Silas had looked through her as if she were glass. Then came the matrons of the town council, offering him a chance to work on the chain gang as a mercy. He remained motionless. They sent younger women, hoping a pretty face might coax a response. Nothing. Their kindness was a currency he refused to accept, for he knew its true price. Their failure was a quiet, mounting humiliation for the town's leadership. Marcus Caldwell wanted the man broken or gone, and neither was happening. Taza watched it all from the fringes. She understood cages. The town was its own kind of cage for her, a place of wary transactions where she was always the outsider, the Apache girl, the giant. Her height, which in the open country of her youth had been a sign of strength, was here a mark of freakishness. She lived in a small, neat cabin in the stony hills, a place the townsfolk imagined was wild and savage. In reality, it was a place of profound peace, filled with the scent of drying herbs and the quiet industry of her work tanning hides. She knew what it was to be seen as a symbol instead of a person. In Silas's silent defiance, she recognized a language she understood intimately, the fierce, unyielding preservation of the self in a world determined to erase it. The impulse that moved her was not pity. Pity was what the town's women offered, a condescending balm for their own discomfort. What Taza felt was a deep, resonant chord of recognition. She sold her last 2 fox pelts to the general store owner, her transaction as brief and wordless as always. Then, instead of turning back toward the hills, she walked across the sun-scorched square, her long strides eating up the ground. Her shadow fell over Sheriff Brody long before she reached him. He looked up, startled, squinting at the tall figure blocking the sun. "What do you want, Taza?" he asked, his tone wary. Her voice was low, like stones rubbing together at the bottom of a riverbed. "The prisoner. He needs water." Brody grunted, mopping his brow. "He gets water." "Real water," she clarified. "Not from the trough." She held up a small, tightly woven pouch of coins. "I will pay for it. And food." The sheriff looked from her to the jail, then back again. It was a strange request, but he was at his wit's end. Every strategy had failed. Caldwell was breathing down his neck. The man in the cell was becoming a silent, festering wound on the town. Maybe this was a new kind of cruelty. Let the Apache woman try. Let 2 outcasts contend with one another. A bitter smile touched his lips. "Be my guest," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't expect a thank you." Taza gave a single, sharp nod. She went not to the saloon but to the town well, where she drew a fresh bucket. The water was cool and clear. She filled a clean canteen she carried, then went to the baker's and bought a small loaf of dark bread, still warm. She didn't approach the cell with pronouncements or questions. She walked to the bars, her movements deliberate and calm. Inside, Silas was sitting on his cot, still as stone. He had watched her cross the square, had seen the exchange with the sheriff. He expected nothing. But this woman was different. She didn't stand back at a safe distance. She came right up to the bars, her presence filling the small space outside his cell. She was taller than any woman he'd ever seen, with broad shoulders and hands that looked strong enough to bend iron. Her face was a landscape of planes and angles, unsmiling but not unkind. Her dark eyes met his, and for the first time, he felt seen. Not assessed, not judged, but simply seen. She said nothing. She knelt, her knees barely making a sound in the dust, and slid the canteen and the wrapped bread under the bars. She pushed them just far enough for him to reach. Then she stood, met his gaze once more, and walked away. Silas did not move for a long time. The scent of fresh bread filled the stale air of his cell. The canteen glistened with condensation. It was the first act of simple, unconditional humanity he had been shown in weeks. He looked at the offering, then at the empty doorway through which the tall woman had disappeared. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took the bread. The next day, she returned at the same time. Again, she brought fresh water and a piece of bread. And again, she left without a word. This became their ritual. Taza would arrive in the heat of the afternoon, a silent provider. Silas, in turn, would accept the offering. He began leaving the empty canteen from the day before just inside the bars for her to collect. It was a conversation without words, a treaty negotiated in the space between 2 solitudes. The town watched, baffled. The women who had failed whispered behind their hands. The men in the saloon made crude jokes. But Sheriff Brody just watched, a strange feeling churning in his gut. This wasn't working in the way he'd expected. The prisoner wasn't breaking. If anything, he seemed calmer, more centered. The fierce, banked fire in his eyes was still there, but it was no longer the only thing you could see. One afternoon, a week into the ritual, Taza noticed the dark, ugly gash on Silas's forearm, a gift from one of the deputies during his arrest. It was inflamed, the edges red and angry. The next day, along with the bread and water, she brought a small deerskin pouch. She opened it and took out a poultice of crushed green leaves. The scent of yarrow and plantain filled the air. For the arm, she said. Her voice, spoken aloud in the quiet jailhouse, seemed to echo. It was the first time she had spoken to him. Silas looked at the poultice, then at her. He hesitated. To accept this was to accept help, to admit a need. It was a crack in the armor of his stoicism. But looking into her steady eyes, he understood this was not an act of pity. It was an act of practical care, as simple and direct as setting a broken bone. He slowly extended his wounded arm through the bars. Taza knelt. Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she applied the cool paste to his skin. Her fingers were long and deft, her presence radiating a profound and grounding calm. For that moment, the bars between them ceased to exist. There was only the shared space of a wound being tended. She worked in silence, binding the poultice with a strip of clean cloth. When she was done, she met his eyes. He cleared his throat, his voice a rough and used thing. "Thank you," he said. Taza gave that same single, sharp nod and left. But something had changed. A wall had been breached, not with force, but with a simple green poultice. Their silent ritual was now punctuated by brief words. She would ask, "The arm?" and he would reply, "Better." He learned her name was Taza. She learned his was Silas. She told him of the hawk that nested in the cliffs behind her cabin. He told her of the sound of a hammer on hot steel, a sound he missed like a part of his own body. They built a bridge across the chasm of their circumstances, a quiet structure of shared humanity. The town, however, was growing impatient. Marcus Caldwell was tired of the spectacle. His son, Jeb, still nursing his bruised ego, took to loitering near the jail when Taza visited. "Still trying to tame the beast, Giant?" Jeb sneered one afternoon, leaning against a post, chewing on a piece of straw. "Maybe you ought to be in a cage next to him. Make a fine pair." Taza didn't even grant him a glance. She placed the water and a handful of dried jerky by the bars as she always did. But inside the cell, Silas's hands clenched into fists. He had endured insults against himself in silence, but the casual venom directed at her stirred something deep and protective within him. He rose from his cot, and the full height and power of his frame seemed to shrink the cell. He moved to the bars, his eyes locking on Jeb Caldwell with an intensity that made the younger man take an involuntary step back. "Leave her be," Silas said. The words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of thunder. Jeb, startled by the direct address, stammered for a moment before his arrogance returned. "Or what? You'll break out of there?" "I don't think so." Taza placed a hand gently on the bars, not far from Silas's. "He does not need to," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of flint. "You are a small man, Jeb Caldwell. Your words are small. Go away." The quiet authority in her voice, combined with Silas's burning stare, was enough. Jeb spat on the ground and swaggered off, but the retreat was obvious. In the silence that followed, Silas looked at Taza's hand, still resting on the bars. He slowly raised his own and placed it opposite hers, his dark skin almost touching her brown. They stood like that for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of the world they shared against the one that surrounded them. The cage was still there, but they were now on the same side of it. That night, one of the deputies, on Caldwell's payroll, went into the jail. He wasn't trying to get Silas to talk. He was there to deliver a message. Taza arrived the next day to find Silas with a newly split lip and a deep purple bruise swelling around his eye. Her calm finally broke. A cold fury entered her eyes. "Who?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. Silas just shook his head, looking away, ashamed to be seen this way. But Taza already knew. The rot in redemption started at the top. She knew then that bread and water were not enough. A poultice could not heal this kind of wound. The cage had to be opened. Marcus Caldwell had finally run out of patience. He saw the growing, unspoken connection between the prisoner and the Apache woman as a mockery of his authority. He met with Sheriff Brody and the town mayor. It was decided. Silas would be declared a vagrant and a danger, and in 3 days, he would be handed over to the state marshal to be sent to the prison mines at Carson City. It was a death sentence, delivered slowly and brutally in the dark heart of a mountain. Brody had the decency to look ashamed when he told Taza she was no longer permitted to visit. "It's done," he said, avoiding her eyes. "It's out of my hands." Taza looked past him, at the jail where Silas now sat in true isolation. She thought of his quiet dignity, of the way his hands, made for shaping steel, rested uselessly at his sides. She thought of his voice, finally rediscovered only to be silenced forever. No, she thought. It was not done. She didn't go back to the hills. She went to the livery, a place run by a cantankerous old man named Peters who cared more for the quality of a man's work than the color of his skin. She remembered the one thing Silas had told her about his life before redemption. Did a blacksmith pass through here about a month back? Taza asked him. A big man. Black. Peters squinted at her. Aye. Name of Silas. Stayed a night. Looked at my forge. Man knows his way around an anvil. I'll give him that. Saw the way he held a hammer. Shame what happened. Is your forge busy? She asked. Peters snorted. Our blacksmith, Henderson, is more familiar with the inside of a whiskey bottle than a fire. My forge has been cold for a week. Town's horses are throwing shoes left and right. That was all she needed. Taza walked from the livery to the saloon, the place where everything in redemption was truly decided. It was late afternoon, and the place was filled with ranchers and town leaders, including Mayor Thompson and Marcus Caldwell himself. When she pushed through the batwing doors, the entire room fell silent. An Apache woman, and a giant one at that, had never set foot in here. She ignored the stunned faces and walked directly to the table where the mayor and Caldwell sat with Sheriff Brody. She stood before them, her height making them all seem small and slumped in their chairs. You have a problem, Taza stated, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the silent room. Your blacksmith is a drunk. Your horses are going lame. Your wagons need mending. Mayor Thompson sputtered. What is the meaning of this? You have a master blacksmith sitting in your jail. Taza continued, her eyes fixed on Caldwell. You plan to send him to die in a mine because your son's pride was wounded. Caldwell rose to his feet, his face purple with rage. That man is a violent criminal, and you are an interfering squaw who should have stayed in the hills where she belongs. Taza didn't flinch. He is a man, and you are a fool. You are throwing away a great asset out of spite. It is bad business, Mr. Caldwell, and you pride yourself on being a good businessman. A murmur went through the room. She had struck a nerve. The practical, hard-bitten men of the West understood the language of assets and liabilities far better than they understood the nuances of justice. I have a proposal, Taza said, her voice ringing with command. Release Silas into my custody. I will vouch for him. Let him work the forge. He can pay the town a fine for Jeb's inconvenience. The slight pause was a masterful insult. His work will benefit everyone. Let redemption profit from his skill instead of paying for his burial. That's absurd. Caldwell bellowed. You can't be serious. I am, Taza said. She turned to the rest of the room. Ask yourselves, what is better for this town? A dead prisoner or a working blacksmith? A feud or functional equipment? You see a monster in a cage. I see the man who can fix your plows before the planting season. Sheriff Brody looked from Taza to Caldwell, then at the faces of the other ranchers. He saw dawning logic fighting with ingrained prejudice. Taza had reframed the entire situation. It was no longer about a black man, but about a blacksmith. It was no longer about punishment, but about prosperity. Bring him, Taza said to the sheriff, a direct order. Hesitantly, Brody nodded to his deputy. A few minutes later, Silas was marched into the saloon, blinking in the sudden light. He saw Taza standing tall and defiant, and he understood. He straightened his shoulders, the chains on his wrists clinking softly. He met the hostile stares not with anger, but with a quiet, unassailable dignity. He looked at Taza, and a silent message passed between them. We stand together. Caldwell made one last effort. You trust him? You trust his word? The word of this giant. Silas spoke then, his deep voice silencing the room for a second time. You do not have to trust my word, he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the townsmen. You can trust my work. It has never lied. And with that, the argument was over. The sheer, undeniable logic of it settled over the room. The men looked at their worn-out tools, their limping horses, and then at the powerful, capable man standing before them. Prejudice was a luxury. A good blacksmith was a necessity. The mayor, seeing the shift in the room, cleared his throat and declared the proposal accepted. The power of Marcus Caldwell had been broken, not by a gun, but by a woman's courage and a simple, economic truth. The forge is no longer cold. The sound of Silas's hammer on steel is the new heartbeat of redemption, a steady, rhythmic song of creation and purpose. It is a sound of things being made strong again. He moves with the grace of a man who has found his element, the firelight casting his powerful form in shades of orange and gold. The cage is a memory, a ghost that fades with every strike of the hammer. Taza often comes by in the late afternoon, when the heat of the day is beginning to break. She brings him a dipper of cool water from the well, just as she once brought it to the jail. He stops his work, takes the dipper, and their hands brush, a brief, familiar touch that speaks more than words ever could. He drinks deeply, his eyes on her. In her face, he sees the hills, the sky, the fierce and quiet strength that saw a man when everyone else saw a beast. In his, she sees the fire of the forge, the resilience of tempered steel, and the profound peace of a soul unbound. They are two outcasts who, in standing for each other, found the one place they could truly belong, beside one another. He hands the dipper back, and as he turns to the fire, a real smile touches his lips. He was a man in a cage, but a giant of a woman had shown him that the strongest bars are the ones we allow others to build around us, and the truest freedom is found in the simple, powerful act of being seen. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. They found their justice and happiness. What part of their journey against prejudice touched you the most? Let us know below.